Hey guys, Juan the Tiger here, and I am bringing you what is the first episode of what I'm going to be calling History Lessons, and the first topic we're going to be tackling is Vietnam. Now this is going to be a series of videos, but this first video is going to be about one particular man, a man that I think is kind of lost to history in his importance within respect to Vietnam, and you probably noticed him, and it's this guy. And that guy is Robert McNamara. He was the Secretary of Defense from 1961 to 1968. He served under both Kennedy and Johnson administrations. Now, what I want to do is just go through his history really quickly, just sort of set up where he comes from. He earned his degree in economics from UC Berkeley in 1937. In 1939, he got his master's degree in MBA from Harvard School of Business. And then in 1940, he was hired on as the youngest assistant professor at Harvard, and he was the highest paid assistant professor to date. And then later on, after the outbreak of World War II, the Defense Department was gaining consultants in various capacities to fulfill roles that they didn't have in the Army. And so he was brought on in 1943. He was commissioned as a captain in the Army Air Corps, and where he served as a statistical analyst for the 8th Army. And so he spent some time in England with the 8th Air Force, and basically his job was to take the data that he could gain to tell how effective the daylight bombing of the 8th Air Force was by comparison to their losses, and how did it stop the German war machine. And then he also did some analysis of Pacific Theater bombings as well. And in 1946, he got out of the service. He got out as a lieutenant colonel, so that's not bad for a guy who was commissioned in the Army as a captain and got out as a colonel within 3 years. That's pretty good. In 1946, after he got out of service, because of an Army friend, he got a job at Ford Motor Company working as an executive. And so he worked from Ford from 1946 to 1960, or well, about 61, early 61. And what's notable about that is he worked as the manager of the Ford division. Because if you know anything about cars, just like say Ford Motor Company has more than just Ford. They've got Ford and Mazda, and they used to have Jaguar, I believe, and a host of other car companies that they actually own. And so under his watch, there were good and bad things that happened at Ford. I'm not going to go into those because it's not really particularly important as they pertain to Vietnam. But what's important about him, as far as Ford is concerned, is in 1960, in November, or actually like October of 1960, he was appointed the very first non-Ford family member to become the president of Ford Motor Company. And so, I mean, that's kind of important in itself because it's a very exclusive car company. And then in 1960, late after President Kennedy, or President-elect Kennedy, had won the election, he contacted Robert McNamara and he offered him 2 positions for his cabinet post. One was the Secretary of the Treasury, or Treasury Secretary, 1 and 2, I always forget how they go. And the other position was Secretary of Defense. Now he flat out turned down the Secretary of the Treasury position because he said he was not qualified. And then he said, well, what? And then Kennedy said, what about Secretary of Defense? And McNamara replied, I'm not qualified for that position either. I am a business executive for Ford Motor Company. What do I know about the military besides the 3 years he spent in the service? Well, Kennedy rebuffed and said, look, there's no school for presidents either. And so after sitting, I think it was like 2 weeks went by, he accepted, and he put his resignation in with Ford. He only spent 7 weeks as a Ford president, and he had to go serve his country, much like that generation did. They went and they served the country if called upon. Now, McNamara went through and he made some big changes in the Defense Department when he got in there. That was one of his requirements, that if he was to be the Secretary of Defense, he was going to staff his own department, and he was going to make and have control to make changes as he wished. And Kennedy gave him that freedom. And one of the first things he did is he streamlined the military. He streamlined and made budget cuts. There was stories within his book where he said that they traveled pretty much in cargo aircraft without soundproofing or anything, and to cut down on the cost. And there's one particular story that's kind of funny, is that Kennedy told him to go on vacation and that he could use one of the two Air Force One aircraft, the 747s. And so he did, and he went to Hawaii or something. So it was like a business trip to Hawaii, basically, to talk to some of the MACV guys. And then on top of that, like the ambassadors and everything. And so then on top of that, he stayed for like an extra week, and the media was all over him for abusing, public, abusing the office, basically, by using these perks and stuff. So he stopped doing that. That was the first and last time he said he had done that. Now, he's known for several things with respect to Vietnam. The Vietnam War is known as McNamara's War. And the big things that he was known for are the budget cuttings. He was known for micromanaging the war when it comes to, like, say, troop movements. And not troop movements, but like troop deployments. General Westmoreland would ask for X guys. They would sit down, think about it, and say, well, you don't need that many guys. You need this many guys. So we'll give you this many guys. So it's sort of this constant back and forth thing between Washington and Vietnam. He was also instrumental in the Cuban Missile Crisis. He was a strong proponent of the blockade. And obviously we know throughout history that was the right choice. He worked on consolidation of the branches of service as far as what sort of aircraft he wanted. Like I said, he was there for streamlining. So he got the F-4 and the A-7, the naval aircraft, and he brought those into the Air Force, and the Air Force used those to some success. And then he also was instrumental in pushing the untested M16 rifle, the battle rifle, that we all know now, into service. And so he gets sort of a bad rap for that, even though it turned out to be a good thing. He's like I said, he streamlined the military. Most of the guys were using the same uniforms. They wanted to use the same weapons. He thought it was a waste for them to be using different weapons, different ammo, different cartridge belts, different uniforms, different aircraft. So he's sort of ahead of his time. We can see that today with the Joint Strike Fighter, where he wanted one aircraft to serve multi-roles within the entire breadth of the service, and that was sort of shot down. Nobody thought that could do that, so he didn't really believe in redundancy. And so now we see, like the Joint Strike Fighter, his programs are sort of coming back. So he was definitely ahead of his time when it came to military thinking, even though he didn't really come in with a big military mind. One of the important things to note is that when he arrived as Secretary of Defense, the troops were at 900. By the time it was like 63 or so, there was 16,000 advisors in Vietnam, and these guys were there to train the ARVAN, the Army of the Republic of Vietnam, on soldiering skills and how to fight and stuff. But I'll get into that later. What I'm going to do is let's go ahead and let you guys know. I'm going to break this into several sections. I believe the next section we're going to talk about pretty much prehistory to colonial period, and we might just cover the colonial period, the French colonial period of Vietnam. And this is all to give you an idea of what is going into this, because the Vietnam War does not exist in a vacuum, and no history exists in a vacuum. We're going to have to talk about what came before. We're going to have to understand why the Vietnamese were so passionate about fighting not only the French first, but then the Americans. So anyways, I'm going to let this go ahead and wrap out. I hope you guys found this enjoyable, and I really hope you found it educational. And I'll talk to you guys in the next episode. Later.
Enemy down!
Counter spy plane up. They're blind.
Enemy down!
Spy plane standing by. That's how it's done. Nice job, team.